We're going to take you now to the United Nations, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is speaking to the UN Security Council. Let's listen.
Down humanitarian aid depots in Lviv. It's demolished grain silos in Odessa. It shelled 8 communities in Sumy in a single day. This is what Ukrainian families are living through every day. It's what they've experienced for 574 days of this full-scale invasion. It's what they'll endure tomorrow and the day after that, for as long as Russia wages his vicious war. A war that President Putin openly declared from the outset is aimed at erasing Ukraine from the map as a sovereign country and restoring Russia's lost empire. In this war, there is an aggressor and there is a victim. One side is attacking the core principles of the UN Charter. The other fights to defend them. For over a year and a half, Russia has shredded the major tenets of the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, international humanitarian law, and flouted one Security Council resolution after another. Let's review. First, Russia's invasion itself violates the central pillar of the UN Charter, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. Second, Russia is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine on an almost daily basis. Third, Russia continues to engage in reckless nuclear saber-rattling, announcing that it's stationing nuclear weapons in Belarus and continuing to use Europe's biggest nuclear power plant and its employees as a shield for its aggression, risking catastrophic consequences. Fourth, Russia is weaponizing hunger. Thanks to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, brokered by the Secretary General and Turkey, approximately 33 million metric tons of grain reached global markets, driving down food prices around the world. Nearly 2/3 of the wheat exported through that deal went to developing countries. Not only did Putin pull out of the deal, but Russia is now mining Ukraine's fields, bombing its ports and rails, burning its silos. As a result, Ukraine's wheat exports will likely fall by 2.8 million metric tons this year. That is the equivalent of 5.5 billion loaves of bread trapped in the world's breadbasket. Russia, meanwhile, on track for a record year of grain exports. The hungrier the world is, the more Moscow profits. Fifth, Russia is using Iranian drones to attack Ukrainian civilians. Drones that Russia procured from Iran in violation of Security Council Resolution 2231. Finally, just last week, Russia hosted North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Putin said that they discussed ways to cooperate militarily, while Kim pledged the DPRK's, and I quote, full and unconditional support, end quote, for Russia's war of aggression. Of course, the transfer of arms between Moscow and Pyongyang would violate multiple resolutions of this council. It's hard to imagine a country demonstrating more contempt for the United Nations and all that it stands for. This from a country with a permanent seat on this council. President Putin is betting that if he keeps doubling down on the violence, that if he's willing to inflict enough suffering on enough people, the world will cave on its principles and Ukraine will stop defending itself. But Ukrainians are not giving up, for they've seen what life would look like if they submit to Russian control. It's that basement in Yehidny. It's families having their children torn away from them and deported to Russia. Children taken away from their parents and deported far away. It's the rubble of Mariupol. It's the mass graves of Bucha. We are not giving up either. Indeed, since we were last here, a growing number of countries have come together to try to forge a different way forward. In June, over a dozen countries met with Ukraine in Copenhagen to discuss the path toward a just and lasting peace, one that upholds the United Nations Charter and its core principles. 2 months later, more than 40 countries, including many members of this council, carried forward that discussion with Ukraine and Jeddah. President Zelensky has put forward a 10-point plan for such a peace. President Putin has put forward nothing. Now, some argue that continuing to stand with Ukraine and holding Russia accountable distracts us from addressing other priorities, like confronting the climate crisis, expanding economic opportunity, strengthening health systems. That is a false choice. We can and we must do both. We are doing both. We must work together to tackle the global challenges that are affecting our people, meet the Sustainable Development Goals, invest in a world where all people have an opportunity to reach their full potential. The United States is the world's leading contributor to these efforts. And as President Biden told the General Assembly yesterday, we will continue to do more than our share to answer the imperatives of our time. At the same time, as President Biden has made clear, we must continue to shore up the pillars of peaceful relations among nations, without which we will be unable to achieve any of our goals. That's why we must send a clear message, not only to Russia, but to all would-be aggressors, that we will stand up, not stand by, when the rules that we all agreed to are being challenged. Not only to prevent conflict, instability, and suffering, but to lay the foundation for all that we can do to improve people's lives in times of peace. I opened by sharing the horrors that I saw in Yehidny. Let me close by telling you what else I saw that day in Ukraine. I saw volunteers rebuilding homes that had been razed by Russian bombs, farmers harvesting fields, people reopening businesses, citizens clearing mines and unexploded ordnance, children returning to schools. In short, I saw a nation rebuilding and reclaiming its future. That is the right of all members of our United Nations. That's what we defend when we stand up for the international order. The right of people not only to survive, but to thrive, to write their own future. Our people, Ukraine's people, the people of all nations, get to write their own future. We cannot, we will not let one man write that future for us. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Blinken for his statement, and now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sergei Lavrov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, colleagues, the existing international order was based on the ruins and following the colossal tragedy of the Second World War. Its basis was the Charter of the United Nations, became the Charter of the United Nations, the key source of modern international law, largely thanks to thanks to the United Nations, a new world war was averted, a new world war which was fraught with nuclear disaster. Unfortunately, after the end of the Cold War, the collective West, led by the U.S., single-handedly decided that it would determine fates of all of humankind, and with its complex of superiority began to more frequently and broadly ignore the legacy of the founding fathers of the United Nations. Today, the West turns selectively to norms and principles on a case-by-case basis, exclusively based on their parochial geopolitical needs. This has resulted in a shaking of global stability, as well as the exacerbation and the fomenting of new hotbeds of tension. Risks of global conflict have heightened. In order to curb them, in order to bring things on a peaceful path, the Russian Federation has and continues to insist on all provisions of the United Nations Charter being respected and applied not selectively, but fully in their full and interconnected way. This includes the principle of the sovereign equality of states, non-intervention in their domestic affairs, respect for territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the right of peoples to self-determination. And the actions of the U.S. and their allies attest to the systematic violation of the balance of needs which have been enshrined in the Charter. Since the collapse of the USSR and the establishment of independent states in its place, the U.S. and its satellites have egregiously and openly interfered in the domestic affairs of Ukraine, as was publicly and even with pride recognized by the Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland in 2013. The $5 billion was spent on cultivating Ukrainian politicians in Kyiv by the West. All of the facts are being swept under the rug. Their attempts to cancel all of what happened since prior to 2014. And for this reason, the theme of today's meeting proposed by the Albanian presidency is most apt, which allows us to restore the chronological succession of events, specifically in the context of relations of the main acting parties in the implementation of the principles and the purposes of the UN Charter. In 2004 to 2005, the West, with the aim of bringing to power pro-American candidate, sanctioned the first coup in Kyiv, forcing the Constitutional Court of Ukraine to adopt an unlawful decision on the conduct of something which was unstated in the Constitution, namely a third round of elections. And even more unceremonial intervention in domestic affairs was clear during the second Maidan in 2013 to 24. Then a litany of Western leaders directly encouraged participants in anti-government demonstrations and acts of violence. The same Victoria Nuland discussed with the U.S. ambassador in Kyiv the composition of the future government to be composed of putschists and the EU's real place in world policy. We all remember her obscene 2 words, showing that the EU swallowed this. In February 2014, the U.S. selected individuals who became key participants in the brutal coup, which was organized, I would recall, one day after what was reached under the guarantees of Germany, Poland, and France. I refer to the agreement between the legitimately elected president of Ukraine and the opposition leaders. The principle of non-intervention in domestic affairs was repeatedly trampled upon. Immediately after the coup, the putschists announced that their top priority was to deny the rights of Russian language speakers in Ukraine, and the residents of Crimea and southeast of the country who refused to reconcile themselves to the outcomes of the coup were labeled terrorists. A punitive operation was unleashed against them. In response to this, Crimea and Donbass conducted referenda fully in line with the principles of equality and self-determination of peoples, which are enshrined in paragraph 2 of Article 1 of the UN Charter. Western diplomats and politicians vis-à-vis Ukraine have been turning a blind eye to this important norm of international law. They have been trying to take all the background and the essence of what has happened and trying to distill this to the inadmissibility of violation of territorial integrity. Let us recall in this connection, a UN declaration was adopted unanimously in 1970. This was a declaration on the principle of international law pertaining to friendly relations and cooperation amongst states. In line with the Charter of the United Nations, enshrines the following: the principle for the respect of territorial
integrity. You have been listening to Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov speak at the United Nations Security Council. Blinken outlined the need for Russia to end its attack on Ukraine and detailed atrocities he says that he witnessed firsthand while there.
Yeah, we heard Lavrov blaming the West for escalating global conflicts and repeated disputed claims about Ukraine, just talking most recently about some 1970s territorial lines. President Volodymyr Zelensky is also there at the Security Council asking for more international support to end the war.